Just practicing. Good morning, members, officers, and any members of the public. Don't see any at the moment. In the public gallery, yes. Or viewing the live stream. Welcome to this meeting of the Civic Affairs Committee. My name's Councillor Peter Fane, and I'm chairing the meeting. And my vice chair is Councillor Paul Bear Park on my left. I will introduce other attendees when I invite people to speak. Those in the chamber are reminded that the meeting is being live streamed. And I don't see any joining us remotely, so I don't think I need to give the usual reminders on that. So let's move straight on to item 1, which is apologies for absence on our agenda. Pippa, any apologies for absence?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we have apologies from Councillor Bridget Smith, Councillor Heather Williams, and also from Councillor Susan van der Ven, and we have Councillor Corin Garvey as substitute.
Thank you. Item 2, declarations of interest. Do any members have any interest to declare in relation to any item of business on the agenda? I see none. Obviously, if we think of interests that become apparent later in the meeting, as usual, we raise it at that point. Minutes of the previous meeting. These are before you, I think. Do any members have any suggested amendments relating to the accuracy of the minutes of the meeting on 9th of July? Yes, Councillor Salino. We'll just pause for a moment. Just while we're pausing, has everyone else got access to their microphones all right if needed? We need to obviously just log in. Sadia.
Thank you, Chair. I apologise, I know I wasn't at the last meeting, but when I was just reading through the minutes, and just a comment, there seemed to be a contradiction. I did send an email yesterday, and I apologise for the lateness of that. It was to do with the paragraph that said it was recognised that parish councillors were unpaid volunteers. But then at the end of that paragraph, it says about if they want to re-elect a councillor. And I just remember from my training as a parish councillor being taken to task by the CEO of Capalca at the time, saying that we weren't volunteers, we were elected, even if there wasn't an election. Does that make sense? So for me, there just seemed to be a contradiction there, talking about volunteers and then talking about if they wanted to re-elect a councillor. But I might have misconstrued those. Just a comment.
I see. My problem is, and I suspect you share this problem, but I can't think of another suitable word that might cover it more appropriately.
I guess it was, in fact, it said unpaid, I don't know, councillors.
Leave it unpaid, shall we?
I suggest councillors serve unpaid.
It's just that term volunteer, because they're not volunteers as such, they are elected representatives of their communities.
We have with us Pippa, who is well practiced at finding a formal word that fits. Can we leave it in Pippa's? Is that all right? Just
yes, yeah, that's
lovely, thank you. I'm sure that Pippa will find a formal word. Yes,
good morning, everyone. Chair. I often find that office holder is a phrase that recognises the fact you have elected legitimacy, but it may also be that you're an unpaid office holder.
Yes. But thank you for that very useful reminder that we, as councillors, are not volunteers. Right, any other comments of accuracy on those minutes? Can we take it then by affirmation that we approve those minutes? Thank you. Well, those minutes of our meeting on 9th of July then stand approved. Let's move on then to substantive issues. Public questions. I believe I'm right in saying there have been no questions received from members of the public that we can consider. Right. to be indiscreet, we have received some questions, but they do not, I'm told, meet the threshold for being raised at this meeting. Report of the usage of the public speaking protocol. This is agenda item 5. And I'm going to ask John Murphy, as our monitoring officer, to report to us.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. The report, I think, is self-explanatory, but just for context, a member of the public approached another committee, the Scrutiny Committee, some months ago, saying he felt that the public speaking scheme, as used by South Cambs, wasn't fair and didn't reflect the Article 10 right of freedom of expression. Scrutiny felt they weren't the appropriate body to consider that. So,
sorry, the Article 10, we're talking about the yes.
European Convention of Human Rights. My apologies. Yes. Article 10, freedom of expression, yeah. A qualified freedom. They referred it over to Civic Affairs, and at the last Civic Affairs, I introduced it, Chair, with your knowledge, saying that I would do a short review and bring a paper back to Civic Affairs this meeting today for your thoughts, for your information, and of course you can decide where you take this. When I've drafted the report, what I've tried to cover is I've set out first of all what Article 10 says, and I think it is important to highlight that Article 10 is a qualified freedom, in that 10.1 says we all have freedom of expression, but 10.2 qualifies that by saying where it is deemed appropriate, there can be proportionate restrictions placed. And I think that's important because I consider that is reflected in our public speaking policy, and in particular paragraph 5, which is the scope of questions. And explaining it in practical terms, when members of the public want to submit a question for full council, cabinet, civic affairs, scrutiny, this is where, as officers, we turn to myself and my colleagues in democratic services, and we look to see whether the question or statement is in scope, or rather, does it fall into any of the categories identified which put it outside the scope. From my experience of being deputy monitoring officer elsewhere and having been involved in similar processes with other councils, I think our public speaking scheme looks good, looks reasonable, looks like other councils have. But that's ultimately, it's a member document. I then looked at the last 12 months of those key meetings, council, cabinet, civic affairs and the like, and I've identified that we do get people that submit questions, and I've put their surnames in there. So you can see the surnames of people who come to our public meetings in person or on screen, and members, you've sat here at council and seen these people ask their questions and their supplementary question. It's working. I also think, in my view, and as I've set out in the report, I believe that the Section 5 scope of questions, the areas where we identify that if you put something in writing, we say, I'm sorry, because it is potentially defamatory or vexatious, or because it's potentially a matter for the police, or if it is something which has nothing to do with this district council, there are areas where I advise the chair, and it is always the chair's decision whether to accept those questions. So I bring this paper back. My belief is that the public speaking protocol that we have is good, is fit for purpose, and is very much like other local councils and where I've worked before. But of course, this is your meeting. You are the civic affairs body. So I've put 2 recommendations in, one of which is, on reflection, you're content that it is working and it is a fair balance. Or you might say as members, no, actually, we'd like to dig a bit deeper and have a look. And that would be, I suggest, we can set up a members working group, and I can get involved in that, and we can look elsewhere, identify best practice, consider what we have, maybe invite consultation, and then come back to civic affairs at some point in the future with any revisions. But Chair, that's what I've hoped to set out in the report. So if I can be of assistance, please.
Thank you. And those recommendations are the options as set out in paragraphs 17A and B, is that right?
Yes, Chair.
Yes, right. So, members, I think we can probably move direct to those recommendations or options, but obviously happy to accept questions for monitoring officer and other matters. Anyone want to review those options or ask any questions of the monitoring officer? Councillor Carr.
I would simply comment that all the constraints indicated in this paragraph 5.1 seem to be reasonable. So I can't see that they are a restraint. The only question I might have wanted to consider is whether there were further grounds for rejecting questions, but I can't see that it's been a problem in the past. So I suspect that these are working well.
Councillor Beppel.
Thank you. I'd just like to ask you, actually, Councillor Fain, as Chair of Civic Affairs and Council, who has to look at these public questions and decide whether they will be accepted or not, whether you feel there's enough clarity in the way this is defined, or whether there's ambiguity, and sometimes there are occasions where you kind of wish that the wording maybe had been tightened up, or where it could have been improved, and the form of words is not quite as it might be.
Well, I see most of these questions. Some of them, there's no need to refer to me as chair because they don't meet the basic threshold. But if they do meet the basic threshold, there is often some ambiguity, some scope for interpretation, but against fairly clear criteria as set out here in paragraph 15. And I feel fairly confident that our criteria do give us clear guidance as to whether those questions should be considered or not, do enable me as chair to use what discretion I have to decide that. I always try to accommodate questioners where I can, if there is ambiguity and it's uncertain. And I always do so in the light of very clear advice from our monitoring officer. So I'm pretty confident that the terms of this particular requirement as set out here on page 9 do meet our needs and do give clear guidance not only to us but also to those who would wish to ask questions. That's a personal view for me as chair. Councillor Nieto.
Thank you, Chair. I was just curious to know if we have like a summary of the questions that have been posed by the public but that have not been approved. Do we know what the ratio is?
I wonder, John, whether you can guide us on that.
I don't have that information to hand, but I can certainly come back to you, or Chair, if you felt that would assist at the next meeting, a short piece just on over the comparable 12 months, those questions that have been submitted, and for reasons after advice the Chair has decided to decline.
Yes, Councillor Nieto, if you bear with me, I'm not keen to go back and review all the past questions and the reasons we rejected them. As I say, there is some scope for interpretation. I think I'm more keen to look to the future to try and ensure that our public speaking protocol enables us to make those decisions in relation to future questions. But I take your guidance on whether we need to pursue this.
Well, I'm just curious because we have like the proportion of questions across the committees is quite low, which it just shows maybe low participation from the local community. So it's just trying to understand where I was heading is, do we need to do more to encourage people to get more involved into the work that it's being done at council?
Yes.
But then, of course, from a methodology or validation of data, I'm also curious to understand what is the proportion. If there are like 1,000 questions and we only approve 3.
Yes.
So it's just trying to paint a picture of what is the public engagement, basically. And if maybe we can think, what else can we do as an
Yes.
authority to encourage residents to participate more and to get more involved in civil
Yes.
matters?
Chair, if I may,
Yeah.
I can certainly reach out, councillor, and come to you and sort of talk you through those figures. I need to do some work because they're quite scattered in over the last 12 months. But in general terms, people couldn't, members of the public or councillors, we're talking about members of the public under this scheme, can submit at any point. And obviously, if they submit questions or statements in advance of the deadline which is set out in the scheme, that gives us time to work with them, and we do go back and reach. On the other hand, if somebody submits a question late in the afternoon on the last day of the deadline, that gives us less scope to liaise with them, to assist them to perhaps rephrase the question, or to highlight areas that the chair's given a decision that would be out of scope. As a more general comment, I would say there are a few people, a few members of the public, who ask a number of questions that tend to be ruled out of scope. So I don't think it's a widespread problem, maybe because we do advertise the policy, and where we have time, officers do reach out and seek to liaise to assist members of the public to craft something which gets in scope, and we can take the chair and the chair's happy with. But certainly, if you can give me some time, I can come out and share that data with you.
That'd be great. Yeah, I mean, I agree with what Councillor Khan said before. I think what is in the current policy for 5.1, I think that seems reasonable. I think for me, it's about promoting a healthy conversation and dialogue, like whilst maintaining scrutiny, because residents, of course, they should be holding elected members to account in a way if they feel that they should or they need to raise a particular issue. But it needs to be, I think, within a certain framework. So I do share that. But yeah, I think it would be just good to see maybe what else can we do to get people more involved in politics. Yeah.
If I may just react to that before I come to you, Councillor Hart. Yes, I think that's a very valid point. I think we do need constantly to be reviewing what we can do to encourage more public participation. If there isn't public participation, the questions is just one form of that, then maybe that's a failure on our part to engage or to communicate, and we need to address that. But I think we want to encourage public participation on the basis of the criteria set out here. And I feel, personally, that these criteria are about right. I think that's the managing officer's advice. And perhaps we come to the broader question of encouraging public engagement separately, but not forgetting it. Councillor Sally-Hart.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it's interesting, and I was thinking about, I agree, I think that as a policy set out, it works very well. And I just wondered if there's any way we could find out, and I'm looking at our monitoring officer, bearing in mind his experience, how our level of question, the level of questions we receive as a district council, how it might compare with other areas. I realise it might be quite tricky to do in terms of population, but I'm just wondering, in your experience, do these numbers look reasonable in terms of engagement from the public, but I also agree that other things that we can do to get greater engagement.
Thank you. If I may, Chair. Yes, I think they look reasonable. It's so hard, isn't it? Because certain committees are more high profile than others. Certain topics draw eyeballs in, and other topics, perhaps those more dry, don't. So it always fluctuates. So yes, but I think, in my experience compared to other places, we do okay, but it does vary. What I would just add as well, I wanted to put on record that for anyone that submits a question and after advice from me, the chair rejects, what officers do is we go back to that individual and we set out in our correspondence which criterion or criteria the chair has deemed that the question is out of scope. So we try to be as transparent as possible with the person. I mean, that's all part, if they've done it in advance of the deadline, there's time then for them to take that on board and come back again. But if the deadline has passed, we would still go back to them and explain that the chair's decision was this, and this is why the decision was raised. So the chair's got nothing to hide, and we do make sure that we are transparent.
Those two, before we specifically address those two options, I just wanted to make one further general point, that what we are considering here is a particular aspect of the public speaking protocol in response to a particular question. And I think the issue that we as a committee need to always keep in mind is, as was suggested earlier, we always need to compare our performance against that of similar councils, or indeed any council, and to consider whether what we are doing is sufficient to encourage the participation that we ought to be seeking in our activities. So this is a particular issue that we are considering here, and the question that we come to on paragraph 10, I think it was, let's up into our options. Here we are, paragraph 10 on page 8. No, it's actually paragraph 17 on page 10, that's what I'm looking for. So do we want to decide that the public speaking protocol remains fit for purpose, balancing the interests of Article 10 of the ECHR as described, or do we want to initiate a working group review to consider whether it is, in particular the wording in paragraph 5.1, whether the scope of that should be amended to deal with this particular issue? Personally, I think that on this particular issue, my recommendation would be that we go with 17A, that we do not set up a working group just to consider this limited thing. We may in the future want to review other aspects on a broader basis. Councillor Khan, yes.
I think the point about making sure that people are aware of this opportunity is a valid one, and we might perhaps take the opportunity to ask our communications team to have some publicity reminding people that they are able to ask questions.
Any other views on that? Councillor Sally.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I agree with your recommendation there. I just wondered, I mean, it might be mindful for this committee to be mindful of keeping almost an eye on how many questions, and now we've got almost like a baseline of questions. We can just be mindful of, you know, if suddenly we don't get any questions, or we hear that, you know, the question's been rejected.
Councillor Bethel.
Yes, Chair, I do support what you said about the wording currently being appropriate, and I don't think there is a need for a review. In terms of this question that's come up about, are we encouraging the public to engage sufficiently, which I think is an important question. It's almost out of scope of our discussion today, but it is maybe something that we need to consider for at another time, about how can we ensure that we kind of not only encourage that engagement, but also make it as healthy and constructive as possible as well.
Try again. I am proposing that we take this matter by affirmation, but I would, for various reasons, like to have a proposer and a seconder on that. Do I have a Councillor Martin Khan? Secondly, Councillor Corin Garvey. Are we all agreed on that? Anyone against? No, I think we can take that by affirmation. So then, so the recommendation, the decision that we've taken is that Civic Affairs does not want to initiate a separate working group, and we do feel that the PSP, the Public Speaking Protocol, remains fit for purpose for the reasons set out. Item 6, update on Code of Conduct complaints. You have a report before you on page 13 of your printed papers. And I call on John Murphy as Monitoring Officer to present this report.
Thank you, Chair. Members, a very short, brief report in the regular fashion. I'm very pleased with this report in that so many of the matters that I have on the file I have brought to an end. And that, of course, means that I've received the complaint, I've spoken to the subject of the complaint, I run everything by the independent person. We have two, so I can alternate them, so I'm not always seeing the same person with the same views. There is contrast there. And in all the instances, the matters have been closed. As a matter of administration, my numbering, I got ahead of myself. I got very excited. I thought there was going to be a standards complaint, and I created a file called JM20. Subsequently, JM21 came in, and that was a genuine standards complaint, at which point JM20, the individual concerned, at the very last minute, declined to submit their complaint form. So that's why it's in error, because I've subsequently numbered after it, so it would be a bit confusing to withdraw it. No, but for this quarter, I'd just like to thank again the independent persons who, when I get hold of them, they give me good, quick turnaround with their considered thoughts when they offer their assessment, which I'm not bound by, but I always find of interest. And I just want to confirm as well, all the subjects of these complaints did cooperate. So I feel it's been a good quarter in terms of working with people to get to the bottom of a potential issue. Any questions, Chair?
I should say I should say that John Murphy refers to these being closed. I tend to consider this, correctly otherwise, as being resolved. I welcome the fact that it's been possible to resolve all these matters by agreement and not turn them into formal procedures. I would just ask John to give us a little bit more information. There are occasions when the monitoring officer needs to consult me as chair or to inform me that something is ongoing. Rarely do we need to go into details, but I think we need perhaps to know a little bit more about our independent, what's the word we use, and how, because I'm not sure that we are familiar with who they are, how they're appointed, or that we give sufficient gratitude for their very poorly rewarded efforts on this. And lastly, just the question of going from one to the other, do we need to have a consistent approach, bearing in mind that these two individuals don't have very regular contact with us? Might there be a risk that we're getting a different approach from each of them when we go backwards and forwards, as the monitoring officer referred to it?
Thank you, Chair. Well, I would hope we get a different approach because they're two different people, and that's the richness, that's the variety, that's the independence that they bring when they review. But ultimately, it would still come back to the monitoring officer to make a decision whether the matter proceeds or is resolved or closed, as I've said. So whilst using A or B adds a little variety to their take, because we all bring our own experience of life, ultimately it still comes to me, and I'm not bound to follow them, but of course I'm always very interested in what they have to say. As to who they are, they're two individuals, they're members of the public, they're appointed by council, so there will be a council paper appointing them. By way of background, one's a retired senior civil servant and has experience of regulatory disciplinary procedures from her career. And the other, a gentleman, he is a local business person, and he is also an independent for a number of other local authorities. So we get good value for money because they both bring wisdom and experience of similar processes dealing with elected members and the range of complaints that you will know you encounter. Sometimes are serious, they have to be dealt with. Others perhaps there is no substance, but they are still shouted loudly at you. Well, these two individuals have got a lot of experience and they bring that to the table. And I do find in their different styles, they both give me good analysis and good assessment, and it's always good food for thought.
Councillor Khan.
I don't know how much you can tell me on this because of confidentiality, but I'd be interested to know, I mean, you've got a lot of complaints here, and all of them been resolved without going through a formal process. I'm wondering basically, what sorts of problems generally are the most common that come up, and how are they resolved? Are they mainly are they mainly matters which are where the complainant doesn't understand the scope of what a councillor can do is acceptable and what isn't, and misunderstands the freedom of your rights, or is it a matter of disagreeing with a decision which they've made, which in fact is within the scope, or is it, why have they been resolved, or is it a matter that somebody's been impolite and he's apologised and the matter's resolved like that? What sort of problems arise?
Sure. Well, at the last Civic, if it just by way of context, we had a discussion about whether at what stage should I make public information, and members felt that it really is only at the end of the process where somebody has been found guilty, so to speak, that that information would go into the public domain. Everything covered in this quarter, far be it from getting to the end of the process, this was the first stage. So the first stage is a complaint, a response, independent person's assessment, and then it comes to me, and I have to determine not if they're proven guilty or not, but essentially, is there an arguable case? And if there is, we move to a second stage where we get an external investigator. Now, for this quarter, none of these matters moved forward to the investigator. They all got to the end of the first stage. And I think in every instance, the independent person's assessment was, there is not sufficient grounds here to move forward. And I didn't seek to disagree with that, and I was minded to say, well, that's also my decision. So it's luck, or perhaps, I'll try and be positive, it's a reflection on good standards across the board from the members that, for the number that we have, they haven't progressed. What do they cover? If I could stop social media, that would make the world a better place because people would be more civil to each other. Now, there are instances where I think people can say things and post images on social media, which, if you were sat next to somebody disagreeing with them, you wouldn't be quite so blunt or challenging. That's not to say they amounted to a breach of the code of conduct, and I am mindful that as elected members, to use the earlier phrase of freedom of expression, in politician-on-politician conversations, there is a concept of having an enhanced freedom of expression, and I have to reflect that. And this isn't me giving you my opinion of, on Sunday morning, if we met in the park, would I tell you that somebody has said something really rude? No, I have to think as a monitoring officer, and in terms of the code of conduct, politician and politician, there is that, maybe the idea is a little bit of elasticity. There's something maybe in bad taste, but that doesn't make it a breach of the code. And that is a challenge, and obviously, potentially that does allow for a can of worms, where people say, you might find it bad taste, and on reflection it is bad taste, but it's on the outer limits of my enhanced freedom of expression. So that's difficult. But yes, I'd say it's in this quarter, it has been mostly where people can provide detail, it's they have disagreed with people's form of expression to each other.
Sorry, I'd started, sir. Okay. You may recall that in council, I make a point of emphasising at the start of council that we are committed to debate, not hate, and that civility in all our proceedings, both social media and direct face-to-face in this council, is crucial. That we're far more likely to reach an understanding and indeed to make our points effectively if we keep to a certain civility. However, as councillors to some extent, some of us regard ourselves as politicians, are we? I don't know, but there also has to be a certain robustness, and members have to be, in my view, careful not to be too easily offended by things which may or may not have been said in the heated debate or indeed on social media. Councillor Bearpark.
Yeah, I just wanted to say a word of thanks to John, actually, for the role that he plays with this, having been on Civic Affairs for a while now. I think it's an important role, and probably don't receive a lot of thanks for for this particular role. But it is important, particularly I'm thinking of the parish council level as well, where there might be disagreements, and the kind of the process of being able to raise a complaint and have it kind of almost hopefully come to a conclusion probably stops things from escalating further. So yeah, just to say thank you very much for the role you play.
Yes, I'd like to endorse that, and also to ask John to pass on our appreciation for the two independent persons, and to emphasise that although we haven't named them here, they were appointed by council after consideration of their very considerable qualifications, and that we do really appreciate the time and effort they give to helping our monitoring officer to give judgment on this. I said earlier that sometimes the monitoring officer needs to come to me as chair. It's a matter of for me, some almost congratulations to the monitoring officer that very rarely has to go further, that he has, as shown here, been able to resolve things. But we need to be aware as a committee that there are times when things may need to go further, and we need to be prepared for that role. Do you want to elaborate? Thank you.
Well, thank you for those kind words. I'll pass on your comments to the independent persons. Two things. What I will do, take on board what I've heard today, for my next civic affairs, what I will do is I'll try and add some information to describe the type of complaint in more detail. I think in the past I've just mentioned social media, but if I maybe add a sentence so you have a feel for something in a level of detail, so you've got an understanding, and that may be something we can pick up as a pattern in the future. And yes, I was just going to say, with just this morning, Councillor Heather Williams, who is not with us today, has sent her apologies. She contacted me this week and has given me the heads up, and I've been on the phone as I drove in this morning to a clerk of a parish council, liaising with them. So I recognise that sometimes there's a filter for me as well. The clerks in parish councils out there are often dealing with these complaints in real time, and by the time it's got to me, it's at least calmed down, and I can direct people to fill in the form, come to me, and then I can talk to them.
So, members, we don't need to do anything other than just note this report, I think. Can we do that by affirmation? We don't need a proposal on this. I think we're all agreed. I can only recall one occasion when we had to have a vote, not in this committee, on whether or not to note a report. That one should be fairly simple. So, that deals with the update on Code of Conduct complaints, and I'm finding it hard to believe that we don't have any other items, but we don't. So I can therefore call this meeting to an end. So this brings the meeting to a close at 10:39, and the next meeting of our Civic Affairs Committee is on 14th of January 2025. I'm tempted to say see you next year, but I'm confident I will see you all before then. So thank you, members. Thank you, John, for your guidance.